Victor Langford thought the quiet blonde woman beside him was just another passenger pretending to belong in first class. But within the next 2 hours, one last name would destroy his confidence so completely that he would barely be able to speak. The private terminal at JFK shimmered beneath soft golden lighting as wealthy travelers rolled designer luggage across polished marble floors, their expensive watches catching the glow from overhead chandeliers. Flight attendants in tailored Navy uniforms greeted passengers with polished smiles, while a pianist near the lounge played slow jazz that echoed gently through the terminal. Everything about the place whispered exclusivity. And that was exactly why the woman standing near gate A12 immediately caught attention. Claire Whitmore wore faded white sneakers, dark jeans, and a loose gray cardigan that looked more comfortable than fashionable. Her blonde hair was tied back in a low ponytail, and unlike the women around her covered in luxury brands and diamond jewelry, Claire carried no visible signs of wealth at all. In one hand was a worn leather tote bag. In the other was a thick cream-colored folder sealed with a silver legal band. Attached to the tote bag was a metallic luggage tag partially hidden beneath the strap. The only visible word on the tag read, Whitmore. Most people never noticed it. But eventually, one man would wish he had. Claire quietly approached the priority boarding line, while several passengers glanced toward her with visible confusion. A woman wearing oversized sunglasses looked Claire up and down before whispering something to her husband that made him smirk. Near the gate entrance stood Victor Langford, a sharply dressed businessman in his late 40s whose navy Italian suit looked freshly pressed straight from Madison Avenue. His silver Rolex flashed beneath the terminal lights as he checked messages on his phone while speaking loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear about mergers, private investors, and billion-dollar contracts. Victor enjoyed being noticed. Men like him always did. The moment his eyes landed on Claire, his expression changed. It wasn't anger. It was worse. Dismissal. The kind reserved for people he believed existed beneath him. Claire stepped forward and handed her boarding pass to the gate attendant. The young woman scanned it, smiled politely, and nodded. "Welcome aboard, Miss Whitmore." Victor glanced up briefly at the name, but paid little attention. To him, she was just another traveler trying to sneak into a world she didn't belong in. As Claire walked toward the jet bridge, Victor chuckled softly and shook his head. "First class really has changed," he muttered just loudly enough for several nearby passengers to hear. A few people laughed quietly. Claire heard him. Of course she did. But she kept walking without reacting, her posture calm and steady. That only irritated Victor more. Men like Victor expected embarrassment. Silence unsettled them. Inside the aircraft, the first-class cabin looked more like a luxury hotel than a commercial flight. Soft leather seats stretched beneath warm ambient lighting, while crystal glasses rested neatly beside folded linen napkins. Flight attendants moved gracefully through the aisle offering pre-departure champagne to select passengers. Victor settled comfortably into seat 1B and loosened his cufflinks with the confidence of a man who believed the world naturally made room for him. Then he looked up and froze for half a second. Claire had taken seat 1A directly beside him. Victor blinked once as if expecting someone to correct a mistake. Claire calmly slid her leather tote beneath the seat and placed the cream-colored folder on her lap. A corner of a document slightly slipped free from the silver band. Victor noticed an embossed seal stamped across the top page along with the words board authorization in dark blue letters. Before he could read more, Claire gently adjusted the papers closed. Victor leaned back slowly, studying her with growing disbelief. "Excuse me," he said after a moment, forcing a smile that barely concealed the arrogance underneath. "I think there may have been some confusion with seating." Claire turned politely. Her blue eyes remained calm. "I don't think so." Victor gave a short laugh. "You'd be surprised how often airlines mess these things up nowadays." Claire simply nodded once and returned to reading her documents. The response irritated him more than open confrontation would have. Across the aisle, a wealthy couple pretended not to listen while clearly listening to every word. Victor crossed one leg over the other and lowered his voice. "First-class tickets on this route run close to $12,000. Claire looked up briefly. "That sounds expensive." The businessman smirked. "Exactly." The meaning hung openly between them. "You don't belong here." Claire slowly closed her folder and rested her hands quietly on top of it. "I'm aware of where I'm sitting," she answered softly. Victor smiled coldly. Well, that's reassuring. A hush settled across the cabin as nearby passengers exchanged subtle glances. One flight attendant approaching with champagne hesitated for the briefest moment after recognizing the tension. Then her eyes landed on Claire. Something flickered across the attendant's face. Recognition. Real recognition. She immediately straightened her posture. "Good evening, Miss Whitmore," she said carefully. "Can I bring you your usual sparkling water before departure?" Victor's confident expression tightened slightly. Claire offered a polite smile. "That would be lovely. Thank you." The flight attendant nodded respectfully before walking away. Victor stared after her, confusion creeping slowly into his face for the first time that evening. And then his eyes drifted downward toward the silver luggage tag hanging from Claire's tote bag. The visible letters caught the cabin light once more. Whitmore. Victor Langford kept staring at the silver luggage tag as though the single word printed across it bothered him more than he wanted to admit. The aircraft door closed with a soft mechanical thud, while the low hum of the engines vibrated gently beneath the cabin floor. Outside the oval windows, rain streaked across the runway lights of JFK like blurred lines of gold and white. Inside first class, however, everything remained polished, warm, and perfectly controlled. A flight attendant moved quietly through the aisle, placing hot towels on his silver trays, while another poured sparkling water into crystal glasses. The scent of expensive leather and fresh espresso lingered in the air. Claire Whitmore sat calmly beside Victor with her hands folded neatly over the cream-colored folder resting on her lap. Her cardigan sleeves covered part of her wrists, and the edges of her white sneakers showed faint signs of wear from regular use. Nothing about her appearance matched the world around her. And that, to Victor, was exactly the problem. Men like Victor believed wealth should announce itself immediately. Tailored suits, gold watches, luxury handbags, visible status. Claire carried none of those things, which made her presence in first class feel almost offensive to him. He loosened his tie slightly and glanced toward her again. "You travel often?" he asked casually, though his tone carried the sharp edge of evaluation rather than curiosity. Claire looked up from her folder. "Sometimes." Victor nodded slowly. "Business or vacation?" "Business." The answer was short and calm. Victor almost smiled at that. He leaned back deeper into the leather seat and folded his arms. "Interesting." Claire did not respond. The silence stretched long enough to irritate him again. Across the aisle, the wealthy woman wearing diamond earrings pretended to browse a magazine while openly listening. Victor lowered his voice slightly. "You know, most people save for years to sit up here one time." Claire turned another page in her folder. "I imagine they do." Victor studied her face carefully, searching for embarrassment or insecurity. He found neither. That unsettled him more than if she had argued. A flight attendant arrived carrying a silver tray. "Your sparkling water, Miss Whitmore." Claire smiled politely. "Thank you." Victor noticed the attendant's careful tone again. Respectful, controlled, almost nervous. The businessman accepted his champagne flute and gave a faint smirk. "Must be nice," he said quietly. Claire glanced toward him. "What is?" "Living without pressure." Victor gestured vaguely toward her cardigan and sneakers. "No expectations. No board meetings. No shareholders breathing down your neck. Simplicity has its advantages." Claire rested her hands calmly together. "Sometimes, appearances can be misleading." Victor chuckled softly. "Not usually." The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the aircraft began pushing back from the gate. The captain welcomed passengers over the speaker system in a smooth, confident voice, while soft instrumental music played quietly beneath the announcement. Around them, wealthy travelers opened laptops, reviewed investment reports, or discussed real estate deals in lowered voices. Victor fit naturally into that world. Claire looked like she had accidentally wandered into it carrying someone else's boarding pass. Victor took another sip of champagne. "I work with aviation acquisitions," he said proudly. "Private equity, mergers, international partnerships." Claire nodded once. "That sounds demanding." "It is." Victor adjusted his cufflinks. "Most people cannot handle pressure at that level." His eyes drifted deliberately toward her tote bag. "But then again, not everyone aims high." Claire remained composed. "People aim for different things." Victor gave a thin smile. "Sure, some people build empires. Others are content clipping coupons and flying on reward points." The wealthy woman across the aisle laughed quietly into her glass of wine. Claire heard it. Her eyes moved briefly toward the window where airport lights glowed against the wet tarmac. She did not defend herself. She did not explain anything. And somehow that silence slowly transformed the atmosphere around them. Because the calmer Claire became, the more uncomfortable Victor's behavior started to look. One of the younger flight attendants walking past noticeably avoided eye contact with Victor after hearing his comments. But he either did not notice or did not care. Men who spent years surrounded by power often mistook arrogance for charm. Victor glanced once more toward the cream-colored folder on Claire's lap. This time the silver band had shifted slightly, revealing part of another document beneath it. He caught the outline of an embossed logo and several typed words before Claire gently adjusted the papers closed again. But one phrase stayed in his mind. Executive transfer authorization. Victor frowned faintly. The wording sounded corporate. Important. For a brief second, uncertainty crossed his face. Then he dismissed it immediately. Wealthy families did not travel dressed like that. They did not wear faded sneakers and carry old leather bags. They certainly did not sit quietly while strangers insulted them. No, Claire had to be someone pretending to belong. Victor convinced himself of that quickly because the alternative was deeply uncomfortable. The aircraft finally accelerated down the runway, engines roaring louder as Manhattan lights blurred outside the windows. Several passengers closed their eyes during takeoff, while others continued typing emails without concern. Claire calmly held her folder against her lap as the plane lifted into the stormy night sky. Victor watched her carefully. No panic, no nervousness, just stillness. Once the aircraft leveled out above the clouds, flight attendants began preparing dinner service beneath warm cabin lighting. Crystal dishes clinked softly while the scent of rosemary chicken and fresh bread drifted through first class. Victor opened his phone and smirked at an incoming message from his assistant. Tomorrow's meeting with Whitmore Aerospace was confirmed. $4 billion sat on the edge of his fingertips. One signature from the Whitmore family could change his career forever. Victor smiled confidently and typed back 3 words. They need me. Beside him, Claire quietly reached into her tote bag and removed a fountain pen with silver engraved initials near the cap. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly when he noticed them. CW. His gaze slowly drifted back toward the silver luggage tag hanging beside her seat. Whitmore. And for the first time that evening, a small cold feeling began creeping into the back of his mind. The aircraft cruised smoothly above the storm clouds at 37,000 feet, while the lights inside first class dimmed into a soft amber glow. Outside the windows, the night sky stretched endlessly black, broken only by distant flashes of lightning far below the wing. Inside the cabin, polished silverware reflected the warm lighting as flight attendants quietly prepared dinner service with careful precision. Victor Langford sat, relaxed in his leather seat, but his mind kept circling back to the woman beside him. Something about Claire Whitmore no longer fit the picture he had created in his head. Yet instead of making him cautious, the uncertainty only made him colder. Across from them, the wealthy woman with diamond earrings finally leaned forward with open curiosity. "You work in aviation too?" she asked Claire politely, though her tone carried the same subtle disbelief Victor had shown earlier. Claire lifted her eyes from the folder resting on her lap. "Something like that." The woman smiled thinly. "Interesting field. Especially these days. Very competitive." Victor gave a quiet laugh. "Not for everyone." The woman chuckled softly into her wine glass while her husband smirked beside her. Claire simply nodded once and returned to reviewing the documents in front of her. The calmness in her expression began irritating Victor more with every passing minute. Most people shrank under social pressure. Claire did not. And somehow her silence made his comments sound uglier the longer they lingered in the air. Dinner service began moments later. White linen trays were placed carefully before each passenger while flight attendants described the menu in polished voices. Victor ordered filet mignon and a 12-year scotch without looking at the prices listed beside them. Across from him, the wealthy couple discussed Aspen vacation homes and private ski memberships loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Claire quietly requested tea and grilled salmon. One of the attendants nodded immediately. "Of course, Miss Whitmore." Victor caught it again. That careful tone. That strange respect. This time he noticed another detail too. The older flight attendant beside the younger one subtly straightened her posture when speaking to Claire, almost as though she had been trained to do it. Victor leaned back slowly. You seem popular with the crew. Claire folded her napkin neatly across her lap. They are very professional. Professional usually looks different, Victor replied. Claire met his eyes calmly. Does it? Before Victor could answer, his phone vibrated against the armrest. He glanced down and immediately straightened. The message came from his senior partner in Chicago. Any progress with Whitmore Aerospace? We cannot lose this deal. Victor smirked faintly and typed a confident response. Relax. Tomorrow will go perfectly. Across the aisle, the wealthy husband noticed Victor's screen. Whitmore Aerospace? He asked with interest. That is one of the biggest aviation firms in the country. Victor's expression shifted instantly into pride. I have meetings with them tomorrow morning in Los Angeles. The woman with diamond earrings raised her brows. The Whitmore family rarely partners with outsiders. Victor lifted his glass casually. People say a lot of things until the numbers get big enough. The couple exchanged impressed looks. Victor enjoyed every second of it. Actually, he continued, lowering his voice dramatically, if tomorrow goes well, my company could end up controlling nearly 40% of their international logistics operations within the next year. The wealthy husband let out a low whistle. That is serious money. Victor nodded confidently. The kind of money that changes industries. Claire remained silent beside him, gently stirring honey into her tea. Victor glanced toward her and smiled faintly. Not exactly light reading material for reward point travelers. The wealthy woman laughed again, quieter this time. Claire slowly placed the spoon down beside her cup. You seem very certain about tomorrow. Victor leaned back proudly. Confidence usually comes from experience. Or assumptions, Claire replied softly. The businessman's smile tightened slightly. No offense, but billion-dollar negotiations are not exactly unpredictable. Claire looked toward the cabin window where moonlight reflected faintly across the wing outside. People are often more unpredictable than contracts. The room grew oddly quiet around them for a moment. Even the wealthy couple stopped smiling. Something in Claire's tone carried weight beyond the simple sentence itself. Victor dismissed the feeling quickly. You speak like someone who has been around boardrooms. Claire reached toward the cream-colored folder resting beside her meal tray and gently pressed her hand against the silver band wrapped around the documents. I have seen enough of them. The movement was small, calm, but Victor noticed it immediately. There was something deliberate in the way she protected those papers. Not nervousness, ownership. His eyes narrowed slightly. Before he could say another word, a younger flight attendant approached the aisle carrying fresh bread baskets. She paused beside Claire and hesitated. Miss Whitmore, she said quietly. The captain asked me to let you know we should arrive 20 minutes ahead of schedule. Victor looked up sharply. Flight attendants did not normally deliver personal updates from captains. Claire gave a polite nod. Thank you. The attendant smiled respectfully and moved on. Victor stared after her in silence. Across the aisle, even the wealthy couple exchanged uncertain looks now. The businessman beside the diamond earring woman lowered his voice. Do you know the crew? Claire folded her hands together calmly. No more than anyone else. Victor studied her face carefully again. Still no designer jewelry. No luxury handbag. No visible signs of wealth. And yet the cabin staff clearly recognized her. His confidence began developing tiny cracks he could no longer fully ignore. Then Claire did something small that made the cold feeling in Victor's stomach return instantly. She picked up her phone, pressed one number on speed dial, and spoke quietly into the receiver. Yes, she said calmly. I am on the flight now. A pause. No, there is no problem. I would just like tomorrow's meeting moved to the private conference room instead. Victor's expression hardened slightly. Claire listened for another moment before speaking again. Thank you. And please remind them I prefer honesty over presentation. Then she calmly ended the call and returned the phone to her tote bag. Victor stared at her in silence. Because suddenly, for the first time that evening, the businessman who believed he understood power no longer felt completely certain he was the most important person in first class. The tension inside first class no longer felt subtle after Claire ended the phone call. Even the wealthy couple across the aisle had stopped pretending not to watch her. The soft clinking of silverware and low jazz music drifting through the cabin suddenly seemed distant beneath the growing silence around seat 1A. Victor Langford stared toward Claire with narrowed eyes, while the uneasy feeling in his stomach slowly sharpened into irritation. He had spent years around executives, investors, and powerful families. He understood confidence. He understood influence. But the quiet certainty in Claire Whitmore unsettled him because it did not behave the way ordinary people behaved around wealth. She never tried to impress anyone. She never explained herself. And somehow that made her feel more dangerous than the loudest person in the room. Victor adjusted his suit jacket and forced a small laugh, mostly for the benefit of the passengers listening nearby. "Private conference rooms now," he said lightly. "Sounds important." Claire calmly folded the edge of a document back into the cream-colored folder. "Some conversations deserve privacy." The wealthy woman across the aisle smiled faintly. "That sounds mysterious." Victor leaned back with a smug expression. "Or theatrical." Claire looked toward him without changing her expression. "There is a difference." Victor's smile tightened slightly. Before he could answer, one of the younger flight attendants approached nervously, carrying a tablet device against her chest. She hesitated beside Claire's seat. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said carefully. "There appears to be a seating verification issue regarding your boarding credentials." The words immediately drew attention from nearby passengers. Victor slowly turned his head toward Claire, satisfaction quietly returning to his face. "There it is," he thought. The wealthy couple exchanged glances while another businessman farther down the cabin lowered his newspaper to watch. Claire remained perfectly calm. "A seating issue?" she asked gently. The attendant swallowed nervously. "Someone from ground operations requested that we confirm your reservation details." Victor gave a short laugh beneath his breath. Amazing how often these mistakes happen lately. Claire slowly lifted her eyes toward the attendant. "Did ground operations contact you directly?" "Yes, ma'am." Victor leaned slightly into the aisle. "Probably best to clear it up now before the flight gets any farther." His tone remained smooth and polite on the surface, but the meaning underneath was obvious. "You do not belong here." The younger attendant shifted awkwardly. She looked uncomfortable, almost embarrassed, but pressure from other passengers had already filled the cabin. The wealthy woman across the aisle folded her arms. "Honestly," she said quietly, "airlines should be more careful with premium seating. People pay for a certain experience." Several nearby passengers nodded faintly in agreement. Claire glanced around the cabin slowly. No anger crossed her face. No panic. She simply rested one hand on top of the cream-colored folder again, while the silver band around the documents reflected softly beneath the cabin lights. Victor noticed that movement immediately. She protected those papers like they mattered more than anything else she carried. The younger attendant cleared her throat softly. "Ma'am, if there is any issue with the ticket, we may need to relocate you temporarily while we verify the reservation." The words landed heavily across the quiet cabin. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably, while others openly watched with curiosity. Victor folded his arms and exhaled slowly through his nose, pretending sympathy he did not feel. "That is unfortunate," he said. "But procedures exist for a reason." Claire finally turned toward him fully. Her blue eyes remained calm and steady. "Yes," she said softly. "They do." The simple answer somehow made Victor more uncomfortable than confrontation would have. The younger attendant extended the tablet hesitantly. "If you could just provide identification, ma'am." Claire nodded once and reached calmly into her tote bag. Several passengers leaned subtly forward to watch. Victor expected hesitation, embarrassment. Instead, Claire moved with complete composure. She withdrew a slim black passport holder along with a silver card tucked partially inside it. The younger attendant's eyes widened the instant she saw the card. Her posture visibly changed. Victor noticed immediately. The attendant looked down again quickly, almost as though she regretted reacting. "Is something wrong?" Victor asked sharply. "No, sir," the attendant answered too quickly. But the tension in her voice had already changed the atmosphere. Claire quietly handed over the passport holder. The attendant opened it carefully. For one brief second, the edge of an identification badge became visible beneath the passport sleeve. Victor only caught part of it before the attendant instinctively closed the holder again. But he saw enough. The silver embossed logo matched the same symbol printed on Claire's documents. Whitmore Aerospace. A cold feeling moved through Victor's chest. The attendant looked up at Claire with an expression that no longer resembled suspicion at all. It looked closer to alarm. Across the aisle, the wealthy couple noticed the shift too. The woman slowly lowered her wine glass. The entire first-class cabin had gone unusually quiet now. Even the distant clinking from the galley seemed to stop for a moment. Claire accepted the passport holder back without hurry and placed it gently atop the folder. Then she looked directly at the nervous attendant and spoke in the same calm voice she had used all evening. People usually reveal themselves long before the truth does. The young attendant swallowed hard. Victor stared at Claire in silence as those words settled heavily across the cabin. Because suddenly, the businessman who had spent the entire flight judging a quiet woman by her faded sneakers and gray cardigan no longer felt certain he understood who was really sitting beside him. The silence lingering across first class after Claire's words felt heavier than the turbulence outside the aircraft. Several passengers avoided looking directly at her now, almost as though the atmosphere around seat 1A had quietly shifted into something none of them fully understood yet. The younger flight attendant still stood frozen beside Claire, holding the tablet against her chest, while uncertainty moved visibly across her face. Victor Langford noticed every detail. The attendant's nervous posture, the sudden caution in her voice, the way she no longer treated Claire like a passenger whose ticket needed verification. Something had changed, and Victor hated not knowing what it was. He cleared his throat softly and forced a controlled smile back onto his face. "Well," he said lightly, "I suppose that clears things up." The younger attendant nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. There appears to be no issue with the reservation." Across the aisle, the wealthy woman raised an eyebrow. That was fast. The attendant hesitated. There was never actually a problem with the seat assignment. Victor's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Then why interrupt dinner service? The young woman looked uncomfortable now. Ground operations flagged the reservation for manual confirmation due to special clearance status. The moment those words left her mouth, the cabin seemed to grow quieter again. Victor blinked once. Special clearance? The attendant immediately realized she had said too much. "I apologize," she answered quickly. "I should not discuss internal procedures." Claire calmly lifted her teacup without reacting. Her movements remained smooth and unhurried, as though the entire situation carried no importance to her at all. That calmness continued unsettling Victor more than open confrontation ever could. The businessman across the aisle leaned forward slightly. Special clearance usually means executive travel or government authorization. His wife glanced toward Claire again, no longer smiling quite as confidently as before. Victor gave a dismissive chuckle. Airlines love making ordinary things sound important, but even he no longer sounded fully convinced. The younger attendant quickly excused herself and disappeared toward the front galley, carrying the tablet tightly against her chest. Victor watched her go. Something about her reaction bothered him deeply now. He had spent years around high-level corporate travel. He knew how airline staff behaved around celebrities, executives, politicians, and investors, and what he had just seen looked dangerously close to recognition. Claire quietly unfolded one of the documents inside her cream-colored folder while the warm cabin lights reflected against the silver band around the papers. Victor tried not to stare, but his eyes drifted toward the page anyway. He only caught fragments before Claire turned the document slightly away. Executive Board Transfer. Strategic Control Division. Authorized signature required. Victor's heartbeat slowed slightly. His expression remained composed on the surface, but something cold had begun spreading quietly beneath his confidence. Across the aisle, the wealthy woman noticed Victor staring. "You really are nervous now," she whispered with amusement. "I am not nervous. You keep looking at her papers." Victor forced a small laugh. "Because this entire situation feels ridiculous." Claire gently placed the document back inside the folder. "Some situations only feel ridiculous before people understand them." Victor turned toward her sharply. "You speak in riddles a lot." Claire looked calmly out the window where moonlight stretched faintly across the clouds beneath them. Not everyone listens carefully the first time. For a moment, Victor said nothing at all. Then his phone vibrated again against the armrest. He picked it up immediately. Another message from his assistant appeared on the screen. "Urgent. Call me now." Victor frowned and answered quietly. "What is it?" His assistant sounded tense. There has been a last-minute change regarding tomorrow's Whitmore Aerospace meeting. Victor's jaw tightened. What kind of change? The final approval authority was reassigned tonight. Victor sat straighter. To who? A pause followed. We do not know yet. The board updated the authorization 30 minutes ago. Victor's face hardened slightly. That is impossible. We already confirmed the signatures. Apparently someone higher intervened. Victor glanced sideways toward Claire almost involuntarily. She remained perfectly calm, slowly fastening the silver band back around her folder. Find out who, Victor said quietly. Immediately, he ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Across the aisle, the wealthy businessman noticed the change in Victor's expression. Problem. Victor forced a smile. Just corporate politics. But his voice no longer carried the same confidence. Near the front galley, the younger flight attendant suddenly reappeared beside an older senior attendant with silver hair neatly pinned beneath her navy cap. Unlike the younger crew members, the older woman carried herself with calm authority. She approached Claire directly. Miss Whitmore, she said softly. I apologize for the earlier interruption. Victor immediately looked up again. The older attendant continued carefully. The captain asked me personally to confirm that your transportation arrangements in Los Angeles have already been secured. Several passengers nearby exchanged startled glances. Claire gave a polite nod. Thank you. That will not be necessary, though. Of course, ma'am. The older attendant hesitated briefly before adding something quieter. Your mother also requested that we extend our appreciation for your continued partnership with the company. Victor's blood seemed to stop moving for half a second. The company. The older attendant immediately caught herself and straightened. Enjoy the rest of your evening, Miss Whitmore. Then she walked away before anyone could question her further. The room had gone completely silent now. Even the wealthy couple across the aisle stared openly toward Claire. Victor slowly turned his head toward the silver luggage tag hanging beside her seat once more. Whitmore. The same name printed across billion-dollar contracts sitting inside his office back in Manhattan. The same name attached to the company that could make or destroy his future by tomorrow morning. And for the first time since boarding the aircraft, Victor Langford no longer looked at Claire Whitmore with arrogance. He looked at her with uncertainty. The atmosphere inside first class had changed completely after the senior flight attendant walked away. What began as quiet judgment toward a woman in faded sneakers had slowly transformed into uncertainty spreading seat by seat across the cabin. The wealthy couple across the aisle no longer whispered jokes beneath their breath. Even the businessman farther down the row had lowered his laptop entirely, openly watching Claire Whitmore now. But Victor Langford refused to surrender his confidence completely. Men like Victor built their entire identity around status. And when status feels threatened, arrogance often becomes louder before it collapses. He adjusted the sleeve of his Italian suit and forced a short laugh that sounded hollow even to himself. Airlines really know how to make people feel important these days. No one laughed with him this time. Claire calmly continued reviewing the documents inside her cream-colored folder while the soft cabin lights reflected across the silver embossed seal stamped onto the papers. Victor's eyes drifted toward the logo again. Whitmore Aerospace, the same company name that had dominated his entire professional life for the past 6 months. The same company holding tomorrow's $4 billion decision in its hands. His jaw tightened slightly. No, it could not be her. It simply did not fit the image in his mind. The Whitmore family traveled with entourages, security details, designer wardrobes, private terminals. They did not sit quietly in gray cardigans drinking tea while strangers insulted them. Victor leaned closer, lowering his voice. You know, he said carefully, using a family name does not automatically open executive doors. Claire slowly lifted her eyes toward him. I never said it did. Victor forced a thin smile. Then perhaps people are reading too much into coincidence. Claire closed the folder gently and rested both hands atop it. Perhaps. The calmness in her answer irritated him again. Across the aisle, the wealthy woman shifted awkwardly in her seat. Even she seemed uncertain now whether standing beside Victor was wise. The aircraft suddenly jolted lightly from turbulence, causing glasses to rattle softly across the tray tables. A few passengers glanced nervously toward the windows while the seatbelt sign illuminated overhead. The captain's voice came calmly over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, We are passing through a brief weather system. Please remain seated. Claire remained perfectly composed during the turbulence, one hand resting lightly atop the folder beside her. Victor noticed another small detail then. Attached to the folder beneath the silver band was a black access card with metallic lettering partially visible along the edge. Executive Authorization Level 7. Victor stared harder now. His heartbeat slowed slightly. He had personally visited Whitmore Aerospace headquarters twice in Chicago during preliminary negotiations. He remembered seeing executives carry similar access credentials clipped inside their jackets. The wealthy businessman across the aisle noticed Victor staring. "You know," he said quietly. "That card looks familiar." Victor immediately straightened. A lot of companies use similar badges. But his voice lacked certainty now. Claire gently removed the black card from the folder and placed it calmly beside her teacup while continuing to read another document. The motion was small, deliberate. Every eye nearby followed it. The silver lettering reflected clearly beneath the cabin light now. Whitmore Aerospace Executive Access. The room fell silent again. Victor's throat tightened. The wealthy woman across the aisle looked openly uncomfortable now. "Victor," she whispered carefully, "maybe you should let this go." But Victor had already gone too far to retreat gracefully. Pride trapped people long before consequences ever arrived. He gave a cold smile and leaned back. "Interesting prop," he said. "Very convincing." Claire slowly looked toward him. "You think it is fake?" "I think people enjoy pretending to belong to worlds they admire." The sentence landed heavily across the cabin. A younger passenger farther back visibly grimaced at Victor's tone. One of the flight attendants standing near the galley froze after hearing it. Claire remained calm. "And you believe appearances tell you everything?" Victor spread one hand confidently. "Usually enough." Claire studied him quietly for a moment before speaking again. "That must make disappointment difficult." The businessman's expression hardened instantly. Across the aisle, the wealthy husband exhaled softly beneath his breath. The entire exchange had become painful to watch now. Victor reached for his phone again and abruptly opened his email. Several new messages from his assistant filled the screen. Urgent update. Board authorization changed again. Primary. Signature now required from CW. Victor's stomach tightened sharply. CW. His eyes slowly drifted toward the silver initials engraved on Claire's fountain pen resting beside the black executive card. CW. The cabin suddenly felt much smaller around him. But instead of backing down, Victor made the worst decision yet. He laughed, loud enough for several nearby passengers to hear. "You know what I think?" he said coldly. "I think people are so desperate to feel powerful these days that they borrow important names and expensive credentials, hoping nobody asks questions." The words echoed sharply through the silent first-class cabin. Several passengers looked away uncomfortably. One of the younger flight attendants visibly stiffened near the galley entrance. Claire slowly closed the folder completely now. Then, with calm precision, she slid one document free from the silver band and placed it flat across the tray table between them. The paper carried a dark blue embossed seal along with a bold executive heading. Victor's eyes locked instantly onto the signature line at the bottom. Authorization pending, Claire Whitmore. The businessman froze mid-breath. Claire rested one hand lightly beside the document and finally spoke in a voice so calm it somehow carried more weight than shouting ever could. "Then perhaps," she said softly, "you should ask more questions before deciding who belongs in the room." The words hung in the first-class cabin like a weight pressing against every seat. Nobody moved. Nobody reached for their drinks. The low jazz music drifting from the overhead speakers suddenly felt painfully distant beneath the silence surrounding Victor Langford and Claire Whitmore. Victor stared down at the document lying between them on the tray table. Authorization pending, Claire Whitmore. The dark blue embossed seal beneath the signature line carried the unmistakable crest of Whitmore Aerospace. He had seen that seal stamped across contracts, acquisition reports, and executive briefings for months. His company had spent nearly a year fighting for access to Whitmore Aerospace's international logistics division. Investors, analysts, and board members had all spoken. About one final approval still needed before the deal could close. Nobody outside the family knew exactly who held that authority now. And suddenly, 37,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, Victor realized the answer had been sitting quietly beside him the entire flight, wearing faded white sneakers and a gray cardigan. Across the aisle, the wealthy woman slowly lowered her wine glass onto the tray table with trembling fingers. Her husband looked equally stunned. Even the younger flight attendants near the galley had stopped pretending not to watch. Victor opened his mouth once, then closed it again. For the first time that evening, the man who always controlled every room no longer seemed able to find words. Claire calmly straightened the document on the table and slipped the silver fountain pen from beside her teacup. The engraved initials reflected softly beneath the cabin lights. "CW, this is not possible," Victor said quietly at last. Claire looked toward him calmly. "Why?" His throat tightened. "Because if you were really connected to Whitmore Aerospace, people would know." Claire's expression never changed. "Some people only notice wealth when it asks for attention." The sentence landed like a quiet blade. Victor stared at her in silence, while every humiliating moment from the flight replayed in his mind all at once. The jokes about reward points, the comments about not belonging, the cold smiles, the public suspicion over her seat. And through all of it, Claire had never once raised her voice. She had simply watched him reveal himself piece by piece. The wealthy businessman across the aisle finally spoke. "You are part of the Whitmore family?" Claire turned slightly toward him. "My grandfather founded Whitmore Aerospace in 1968. The man's face lost color immediately. Even his wife looked visibly embarrassed now. Victor's heartbeat pounded harder beneath his calm exterior. "Then tomorrow's board authorization," Claire nodded once, "requires my approval." The room went completely silent. Victor blinked slowly as realization crashed fully into him at last. The $4 billion deal his company had chased for months. The meetings, the presentations, the negotiations, the future of his entire division. All of it depended on the woman he had spent the entire flight quietly humiliating. One of the senior flight attendants suddenly approached the cabin again, but this time her posture carried unmistakable formality. Behind her stood the captain himself in full uniform. The moment passengers noticed him entering first class personally, the atmosphere shifted completely. The captain stopped beside Claire's seat and smiled respectfully. "Miss Whitmore," he said warmly, "I wanted to personally welcome you aboard tonight." Victor's stomach dropped. The captain continued calmly. "Your mother asked me to ensure your flight remained comfortable after the schedule change." Claire offered a small, polite smile. "Thank you, Captain Reynolds. Everything has been perfectly fine." The captain's eyes shifted briefly toward Victor and the tense silence surrounding the row. He understood immediately. Pilots learn to read rooms quickly. "If there is anything further you need before arrival in Los Angeles, my crew will handle it personally," he added carefully. "I appreciate that." The captain nodded respectfully and stepped away while several nearby passengers openly stared now. Victor sat frozen in his seat. The older flight attendant returned moments later carrying a slim black portfolio case. She handed it directly to Claire with both hands. The executive transfer documents from Chicago arrived during secure relay transmission, ma'am. Victor stared at the case like it contained dynamite. Claire calmly opened it. Inside rested several neatly organized contracts bearing Whitmore Aerospace seals along with a silver corporate badge displaying her photograph beneath the title, Executive Chairwoman. Victor's face drained completely of color. Across the aisle, the wealthy woman looked horrified at herself now. Claire removed one contract from the portfolio and reviewed the final page silently. Victor noticed his own company name printed clearly across the bottom. Langford Strategic Holdings. His mouth went dry instantly. Claire finally looked toward him again. There was no cruelty in her expression, no revenge, only quiet disappointment. "You are reviewing our acquisition proposal," Victor said weakly. Claire nodded once. "I was planning to sign the preliminary approval tomorrow morning." Victor swallowed hard. "Was..." The single word nearly disappeared beneath the silence. Claire rested the silver fountain pen gently against the unsigned contract. "My grandfather built this company with one rule above all others," she said softly. "Character matters more than presentation." Victor could barely breathe now. Around them, nobody spoke. The wealthy passengers who had laughed earlier could not even meet Claire's eyes anymore. Because suddenly, the quiet woman they dismissed as ordinary had become the single most powerful person on the aircraft. And the businessman who judged her by her cardigan and worn sneakers now understood something terrifying. The entire flight had never been about first class at all. It had been a test of character, and he had failed it completely. The silence inside first class lingered long after Claire Whitmore finished speaking. Nobody reached for their drinks anymore. Nobody pretended to scroll through phones or review business reports. Every passenger sitting beneath the warm cabin lights now understood they had witnessed something far larger than an awkward conversation between strangers. They had watched a powerful man slowly expose his own character one careless comment at a time. Victor Langford sat completely still beside Claire, staring at the unsigned contract resting inside the black portfolio case. The polished confidence he carried onto the aircraft hours earlier had vanished so thoroughly that even his posture looked different now. Smaller somehow. Across the aisle, the wealthy couple who once laughed quietly at Claire's cardigan and worn sneakers could no longer look directly at her. The woman slowly folded her hands together in her lap, while her husband stared toward the cabin floor with visible embarrassment. Near the galley, several flight attendants exchanged tense glances. They had heard every word Victor said throughout the flight, and now the reality settled heavily across the cabin. The quiet woman he dismissed as ordinary was not simply wealthy. She was the executive chairwoman of one of the largest aerospace companies in the country. More importantly, she had never once used that power to humiliate anyone back. Victor finally swallowed hard and forced himself to speak. "Miss Whitmore," he said quietly. The words sounded unfamiliar in his mouth now, stripped of arrogance for the first time that evening. Claire calmly looked toward him. "Yes." Victor glanced briefly toward the contract bearing his company's name. "I owe you an apology." Nobody moved. The entire cabin listened. Victor exhaled slowly. "I made assumptions about you the moment you boarded this plane." Claire remained silent. Victor's voice grew quieter. "Your clothes. Your bag. The way you carried yourself. I convinced myself you did not belong here because you did not look the way I expected powerful people to look." The honesty in the sentence seemed to cost him something. Claire studied him calmly without anger. Victor lowered his eyes briefly. "That was wrong." Across the aisle, the wealthy woman suddenly spoke too. "We laughed," she admitted softly. "I did too." Her husband nodded with visible discomfort. "I am sorry, Miss Whitmore." Claire looked at both of them gently. "Thank you for saying that." The captain passed quietly through the cabin once more, pausing only briefly near Claire's seat. Even he could sense the atmosphere had transformed completely. The storm outside had passed now. Moonlight spilled softly through the windows across the clouds beneath the aircraft, while the seatbelt sign finally switched off above them. The turbulence was over. But inside Victor Langford, another kind of turbulence still remained. He looked toward Claire carefully. "I spent my entire career believing success had a certain appearance," he admitted. Tailored suits, expensive watches, confidence, visibility. Claire glanced down at the silver fountain pen resting beside the unsigned contract. "My grandfather used to wear the same pair of work boots every day for 20 years, she said softly. Most people thought he was one of the mechanics when he walked through the hangars. Victor listened quietly. He liked it that way. Claire continued. Because people reveal who they really are when they think someone has no power. The words settled heavily over the cabin again. Victor slowly nodded as realization deepened across his face. He understood now that this flight had never truly been about business deals or corporate access. It had been about dignity, about how quickly people assign value based on appearances, about how easily arrogance blinds intelligent people. Claire calmly closed the black portfolio case and rested her hand atop it. Victor looked at her carefully. Does this mean the deal is over? The question carried genuine fear now. Not fear of losing money alone, but fear of facing the consequences of his own behavior. Claire considered him for a quiet moment before answering. No, Victor blinked in surprise. Even the wealthy couple across the aisle looked startled. Claire's voice remained calm and steady. Business decisions should be based on competence and integrity, not personal embarrassment. Victor stared at her silently. Claire continued. Your company's proposal still has value, but character matters too, especially in leadership. Victor lowered his eyes. I understand. And for the first time that evening, he truly did. One of the younger flight attendants approached cautiously with fresh coffee service, her earlier nervousness replaced now by open respect toward Claire. But Claire accepted the cup with the same quiet politeness she had shown all night. No arrogance. No triumph. No need to prove anything further. Because true power rarely announces itself loudly. The wealthy businessman across the aisle finally shook his head softly. I cannot believe none of us recognized you. Claire gave a faint smile. You were all too busy looking at the wrong things. Nobody argued with her. Outside the windows, the lights of Los Angeles began appearing faintly in the distance beneath the clouds like scattered gold across the darkness. The plane slowly started its descent while the first-class cabin remained unusually quiet. Victor sat motionless beside Claire, replaying every cold comment he made since boarding. And somewhere between New York and California, 37,000 feet above the ground, a man who believed wealth could always be recognized by appearance finally learned how invisible true character can be. The aircraft descended slowly through the Los Angeles night, while silence still lingered heavily across first class. The bright arrogance that once filled the cabin had disappeared completely, replaced by something far quieter and far more uncomfortable. Reflection. Outside the windows, the city lights stretched endlessly beneath the clouds like rivers of gold threading through the darkness. Inside the cabin, nobody seemed interested in champagne anymore. Nobody bragged about investments or vacation homes or executive deals. Because one quiet woman in faded sneakers had silently dismantled the illusion that status could always be recognized by appearance. Victor Langford sat motionless beside Claire Whitmore as the aircraft lowered toward the runway. The unsigned contract remained inside the black portfolio case resting near Claire's seat. Every few seconds Victor glanced toward it before looking away again, as though the paper itself carried judgment. Across the aisle, the wealthy couple remained unusually quiet. Even the younger flight attendants moved more carefully now whenever they passed Claire's row. Not because she demanded respect, but because she never once demanded it at all. That was what unsettled everyone most. Claire Whitmore never used her power to embarrass anyone. She simply allowed the truth to stand on its own. The captain's calm voice finally echoed through the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be landing shortly at Los Angeles International Airport. Local time is 10:42 p.m. The wheels touched the runway smoothly moments later, and soft applause scattered lightly through the cabin before quickly fading again. Nobody truly wanted to break the strange emotional stillness surrounding Seat 1A. As the aircraft taxied toward the private executive terminal, Victor slowly turned toward Claire one final time. Miss Whitmore, he said quietly. Claire looked up calmly. Victor hesitated before speaking again. The confidence that once shaped every word he spoke earlier in the flight had completely disappeared now. You were right. Claire waited patiently. Victor swallowed hard. People really do reveal themselves when they think someone has no power. Claire studied him for a brief moment before answering softly. The good news is that people can also learn. The simple kindness in her response hit harder than humiliation ever could have. Victor lowered his eyes briefly. I appreciate that you did not destroy the deal tonight. Claire glanced toward the portfolio case. Business can recover from mistakes, she said quietly. Character only recovers when someone chooses to change. The words settled deeply across the row. Even the wealthy businessman across the aisle looked visibly affected now. The aircraft finally stopped at the terminal, and moments later the cabin door opened with a soft mechanical hiss. Warm California air drifted gently inside, while airport lights reflected across the polished floor of the jet bridge. But before anyone stood, something unexpected happened. The senior flight attendant approached Claire once more carrying a small silver envelope embossed with the Whitmore Aerospace crest. This arrived during final relay transmission, ma'am. Claire accepted it calmly. Victor watched silently as she opened the envelope and reviewed the single page inside. Then, without drama or hesitation, she removed the silver fountain pen from beside the portfolio case and signed the document with one smooth motion. Victor's eyes lowered toward the page. Approved. Langford Strategic Holdings. His breath caught slightly. Claire carefully returned the signed document to the envelope and handed it back to the senior attendant. Please send this directly to Chicago tonight. Yes, Miss Whitmore. The attendant accepted it respectfully and walked away. Victor stared at Claire in disbelief. You signed it. Claire calmly fastened the silver band around her cream-colored folder again. Your proposal deserved consideration. Victor shook his head slowly. After the way I treated you? Claire looked toward the cabin door, where passengers now quietly waited to exit. My grandfather believed leadership means rewarding competence without letting pride control judgment. Victor could not speak for several seconds. Around them, passengers who once looked down on Claire now stepped aside silently to allow her room to stand first. The wealthy woman across the aisle offered a sincere smile this time. Safe travels, Miss Whitmore. Claire returned the smile politely. You too. Then she rose from her seat. The gray cardigan, the worn sneakers, the old leather tote bag with the silver luggage tag still hanging quietly from the strap. Nothing about her appearance had changed. Only the truth people finally understood behind it. As Claire stepped into the aisle, Victor stood too. Miss Whitmore, he said softly one last time. Claire turned slightly toward him. Victor's voice lowered. I will remember this flight for the rest of my life. Claire's expression remained calm and thoughtful. Then make sure you remember the right lesson. Victor nodded slowly. Claire picked up the cream-colored folder, slipped the silver fountain pen into her tote bag, and walked calmly toward the cabin exit while the entire first-class section watched in complete silence. No designer labels. No public revenge. No dramatic speech. Just quiet dignity moving through the aisle beneath the soft golden cabin lights. And somewhere between New York and Los Angeles, a plane full of wealthy strangers learned something they would never forget. The most powerful person in the room is often the one who never feels the need to prove it.